Okay, this is Nathan Stanford Sr. We're back on the PHP to-do list. I'm going to show you the final result, and then I'm going to go through and show you all of the code that I created to be able to accomplish this to-do list. This is just a simple to-do list, nothing real fancy. It's meant to be a starting place. It's using Bootstrap to make it look a little nicer. And I have been busy at the house, so I didn't make this video right away. Had to do a lot of plumbing issues, so took care of those. Still got a few more to go, but I wanted to record a video, so we'll see how the video goes. So on this to-do list, I'd added a PHP info, so you could go look at your info on your page. If you want to see what that is, just add a PHP page, and inside the brackets where you do the less than question mark PHP, do a PHP info open close paren semicolon, and then do a close with a question mark and a greater than. I'll show it to you in just a minute. So that way you can output what's in your PHP code. Well, let me just click on it. It gives you what version of PHP you're on and a whole lot of other stuff you can go through. This is all on my local host on my Laragon server that I'm using. So when you look here, you can see there's Laragon. That's the one I'm using. So let's click and close that. So let's go look at each of the pages. So if we look at that PHP info, here's what I was trying to show you. It's just going to give you a lot of information about the PHP that you're running on. So on the index page, what I've done to make life easier, you want to learn to, things that you're going to continue to use over and over again, like if you're going to have a header on every page, then why not have an includes header? Now, sometimes I even have the nav bar inside of the header. However, if you have it outside of the header and you decide to have an admin page and you want a different nav bar, then you could either pass a nav bar in here, or you set up a variable where the header sees the variable and says, oh, okay, include that nav bar. And then I have a queries. Now, I'm coming from ColdFusion before. Well, no, I did do a PHP years ago, but I did recently. I've been the last 20 years doing a lot of ColdFusion. So I was like, okay, what would I normally like to do? I like to name my query items to help me keep track of which files are queries. I mean, it's obvious it's queries because it's in the queries folder, but still, this goes and gets the queries. So what is inside the queries items? Let's go look. In here, it's going to the includes config.php. That's the file that you have set up so that you can have your login and password. And if you're going to use GitHub or GitLab or some other version control, you can simply put your code in there, do a file. You could create a file called .gitignore. You would put the name of that file or the path that you're wanting to ignore, so it would not upload your password and your username to GitHub. So here I'm saying this is the query I want. Just simple select all from items. This is all the items that I have in my to-do list. I decided to call them items. Could be called tasks, could be called to-dos, whatever you want to call the column. So then you set up the result, you connect to the query, and then you fetch all with the PDO. PDO has some built-in things that help you with SQL injection. So don't use the old way of programming with PHP if you've been using it. If you're new, then you are going to learn from me and you're going to do the PDO. So then let's go to the config file. Let's look at it. So here it's got the way to get to the local host. That's the name of the database. That's the user. And that's the password. As you can see, it's my local machine on Laragon's. I don't even have it on, so nobody can hack into it. I'm going to always have it turned off, except for when I'm doing a recording and showing you. So here you're saying connect, create a new PDO. I want pass in the database source up here, the username and the password. So we got those. Then we set the attribute and set up error mode so we can check for things. Then down here we're checking, so for some reason it fails to connect to the database, we'll get the message and we'll display the message. So now let's go back to index. So now we've gotten through all of these files. Now we're saying if the actions, if this is set. Now we'll show you this later because this is when you're going to delete. So I'm actually going to close that down and we'll come back to it. So down here I have my HTML with my add button. I have my edit column for my table, my item column, and my delete. So I've got a chance I can edit and rename it in case I named it something wrong or want to delete it. I can delete it. And it's going to take all the items from that query that we created up here in this query items back here. If we go back here, you see how the variable is items. So now down here, we're going to come to here. We're going to loop through each of these items, and we're going to call the variable that as it loops through each item, we're going to call the variable item. So items, item makes a lot of sense. So then in here, when you're putting code in here, let's say we do that, you've got item, you've got the edit PHP item equal ID equals item, $ item, but we're getting the ID from those columns that are in the item. And then the same thing down here. Here's the name, and this here is going to output the name of the item. And then over here is the ID again, because we might want to delete the item. But notice we're passing in the action, delete, and it's going to the index.php, the page we're on. So when we click on that delete, then it's going to, if you look down here, we got the footer down here, but if you click on that, then we'll come back up here to this delete. If it's set for action, it knows it's going to be a delete. And then over here, we're saying, is the action actually delete? That's two things. We check to see if there is an action variable, and if there is, and the action is equal to delete, and if the ID is set, because you can't delete something if you don't know what to delete, and if the ID is an integer and it's greater than 0. Then if all that's true, then we want to take the item ID, get the item ID, the integer item ID, make sure it's converted to an integer because it's coming from the URL, so it's a string, but it's converted to an integer. And we want to run this query, delete from items where ID equals :ID, because what you're going to do is you're going to down here, you're going to say :ID equals this $ID. And over here, you're telling PDO that this parameter has to be an integer. So if something else came through, then you would know that it should throw an error and say, you've got the wrong kind of variable, their own kind of ID. It's not an ID, it's a string or whatever. Connect to prepare the query. Then you run this here. And then down here, statement execute goes and does it. And then after the deletion is done, we want to redirect the user back to the index page, which is the page we're on currently. So if it's no delete, we're there already. But if there's a delete, then it's going to return you back to the index page with the list, with the item deleted. So then the other thing is when we're on this page, let's create something. So on an add, when you click add, and you say test, we're going to just put in test, and then you click that. You see it went to the add page. Then you typed it in, you hit submit, it added it and went to the index page. Click edit and type 22, ahead and do 3 of them. And then we'll do an update. And now it's test 222. So that delete we were doing, see how we're in the index page. We hit delete and it automatically does all that. It shows right back up here. So if we look now at the add, when they click on the add page, here's the form. There again's the header, the nav bar, the footer. Here's the form. So you don't have to rewrite the code for the header or the footer or the nav bar. You just simply include them. And then this is the PHP where it's going to say, go to the item operations. And we'll look at that in just a second. So what you're passing in is this one text field that is name. That's the item you're adding. So if we go to this item operations, we check to see, is it a post? Then we check to see that is it an ID or is the ID 0? If the ID is 0, if it's greater than 0, we're gonna know we're updating, because that means we have an item ID already and we're going to do an update. Then on the insert is down here, we don't have an item ID, so we're just passing in the name. Up here we're passing in the name, but then we're saying where the ID is equal to whatever the ID that we pass in is. So here you're binding these parameters, the name, to be a string, and then we're binding this parameter ID to be an integer, and that's for your protection. And so down here in the insert, you're binding this to be a string. Once you've done that, you send them back to the index. So if we look at edit, it's going to be something similar. We're going to query to get the one item this time. Query to get the item by ID. So we add the config, so we set up the ability to do the query, but then we check to make sure we have an ID before we actually try to use it. And then we run this select query and we say it's an integer. We bind this parameter to integer, and then we execute, and then we fetch it. And then we send it back as an item. So then after we've run that query on edit, then we can simply go in here in the input, and we can go over here, we can say we want to output the item by name. But just in case somebody has put in some malicious code or put in some special HTML, special characters, we're running this to be able to stop it from displaying something it shouldn't, like maybe they put in some JavaScript or something. And from there, once that's submitted, it's going to go to this item operations, and that's where you get to this update. That means if the item is greater than 0, then that means it's not a new item. We're updating. So then you would update this and go back to the index page. So if we go like this and we look, we've been able to go through all of those. So that's all of this code here. Now let's see here. What did I put in here? This was something I was working on. I'm going to delete this because that doesn't need to be there. And let's see, what have I updated? So in VS Code, if you're using GitHub or some other thing like that, you can actually go look at your source control and look at code you changed, and you can actually see what the differences are between what it was and what it is now. So right here we got this working code. Changed. Let's see here. Oh, I just changed the just a little bit here, nothing important. I changed earlier when I clicked here and I hit enter, so now it would be down here. So I'm just going to revert. I click that there. I'm going to revert that back. I'm going to discard the change because the code's already working and there's no reason to make that change. It's just a look and feel change. So now all the changes are gone. There's nothing here telling us if there's any changes. So now what can we do now? Let's close this, and you'll have to let me know if there's any questions you have, or where I went too fast, or where can I help you. I'm going to make that super small change. Now I'll show you what happens in Git Lab, GitHub, whatever one your repo is coming from. When you go to version control, and we just made this small change, so we know that the only thing that was changed is over here. It's got the D being uppercase, which is what it really should be. So I'm just going to say minor text change, and usually you put in something short so that you can remember, something that will help you remember what you did. That way, when you're looking at the different changes on GitHub, you'll be able to keep track of what you did. So now I'm going to commit. Now I could commit and push later, but since I want it to just go ahead and commit, it's such a small change, go ahead and commit and push. So what's going to do, it's going to come up saying I haven't staged anything. So before you do that, you have to click this plus, or if you have a bunch of files, you click up here, which would stage all of your changes. So I could click either one. I'd click the one right by the file. So now I have staged changes. So now it won't complain when I do commit and push. So now it's committing, and up here you see a little thing spinning. It commits to your local repo, and then it pushes that repo up to your GitHub. So your repo locally should now match the one that's on GitHub or whatever place you have local. So if you want, you can come down here and you can see commits that you've made. Let's make this a little bigger. And if you look here, let's make this a little bigger. Here was first commit. Here was a bunch of other things. Here was minor text change, which is the one we just made. And we can come in there and we can actually see what the change was. If we want to, here it says updated the CRUD. Sometime last week I was playing with the code and I updated it. So I can go look at, well, what was it I changed? What did I do? It looks like I may have added these files here. You've got add, and I think I removed that one. I moved it to another folder is what I did. So this is a way you can keep track of things you've done. So I hope this has been helpful. I have plans to make some beginner PHP code for people who are beginners. I'm also thinking about making beginner HTML, CSS for people who are coming from scratch, who have never touched a web page. I want them to be able to learn the fundamentals so that they can be able to accomplish what their goals are, is to learn how to code and build a portfolio so they can get a job and actually know how to do work when they go into the job. So I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and if you could, hit the like button and tell other beginner programmers about what I'm doing. I appreciate that. Thank you.